Major funding for the Great American Quilt is provided by RJR Fashion Fabrics, where innovation is a tradition. By New Home, changing the way America sews. By Keepsake Quilting, publishers of the Keepsake Quilting Catalog, the Quilter's Wish Book. By American School of Needlework Incorporated, publisher of books in all areas of needlework. By Lehman Publishing, publisher of Quilter's Newsletter Magazine, the magazine for quilt lovers. And by Fairfield Processing Corporation, maker of Polyfill brand products for crafting.
Hi, I love the way this feels, and we'll be talking about these two gorgeous quilts in a minute. But our whole subject today is quilt style. So we're going to be talking about a major style shift in quilts and some quilt styles that haven't changed that much, but that artists are working with now. Nancy Crow will be with us in just a little bit, and Diana and Laura will be showing you how to draft patterns so you can make quilts in any style. But back to these two beauties. They're very different in many different ways. This quilt, of course, is cotton, very regular. These baskets were done in squares all over the quilt, and because it's cotton, it's washable. It would be the kind of quilt you'd have on your bed, and it would really keep you warm at night. This one, being a crazy quilt, is not regular at all. It's very irregular in patterning, and it has a lot of embroidery that would have taken a long time. Women on the prairie were not going to be doing embroidery on their quilts. So what happened? Why do these two look so different? This one is just a little later than that one. Well, there was a major style change in quilts because the style and status of women changed during that time. Frontier women used to really work side by side with their men, almost as their equals. Women's diaries tell of plowing the fields one day, giving birth the next, and then going back to the fields the day after that. Those same hands that kneaded the bread also picked up buffalo chips used for fuel to cook it. On the prairie and in the woods, love was fine, but a strong back and brave heart were often better.
'Tain't of much account to have a woman if she ain't of no use. Every man ought to have a woman to do his cooking and such like, 'cause it's easier for them than it is for us. They take to it kind of naturally. I reckon women are some like horses and oxen. The biggest can do the most work, and that's what I want one for.
If women had to be of use, the same was true of their quilts. They were as sturdy and practical as their makers. Made from the cotton calicos that women wore every day, they stood up to heavy wear and hard scrubbings. Their beautiful designs were made a block at a time, perfect for working on in cramped quarters. Now, after 1860, a lot of women could really afford to have other people do the work for them. So they had leisure time to read women's magazines, and for the first time, hear those magazines tell them what quilts were in style and what were out of style.
Patchwork quilts, unless in silks, are rarely seen in cities.
The feminine ideal was not the pioneer helpmeet working side by side with her husband, but the lady of leisure who had servants to help her with housework. The housewife was now seen as a decorative accessory. She was supposed to set the moral and aesthetic tone of family life, concentrating her efforts on beautifying the home and teaching the rest of the family how to act. She had access to books which gave her advice on manners and taste. Family meal times a bit crude? Chapter 2 had them reaching for the proper fork in no time. These same books and women's magazines told women what was in patchwork.
A quilt should appear to have been made on one large foundation and not pieced into blocks.
It was the beginning of experts setting standards, telling quilt makers just what and what not to do.
Do not make the mistake of using too many bright colors, or vice versa.
Well, let's see. Don't make the mistake of using too many bright colors, and don't make the mistake of not using too many bright colors. if you've got that, you can tell me, you can see why women were confused. Well, now we want to show you a way that you're not going to be confused and can make a pattern in any style that you want, because Laura and Diana will show you step-by-step how to draft a pattern.
Good idea. Diana and I have just been talking about some of the advantages in knowing how to draft quilt patterns. Before we jump right into our lesson today, though, I'd like, Diana, can you just share with them some of the ideas we've been talking about? I think they're real important and will help the viewers out there.
Sure, Laura. Drafting, though, does make me excited. I like to draft so that I can take a traditional block and just make it any size I want. I also like to scan books and magazines and be able to make those quilts. But most of all, I like to be a little creative myself and just take these lines and draw them out on my graph paper and off I go.
It's fun, isn't it?
It is.
I was really surprised to find out when I was teaching seminars just how many of you don't take advantage of this tool, and it's just so easy. All you need is a piece of graph paper, a thin plastic ruler, and a pencil, and you're ready to go.
Today we're going to show you how to do the spool block and the attic window block. Both of these are drafted patterns, but we will only draft the spool block. Then we're going to show you how to put them together and...
Right. It's a construction that's called Y-seam construction. And also we're going to show you how to make a plastic template, which is a permanent pattern for the shapes. And then, of course, let's not forget all these wonderful quilts we have to share with you today.
So let's get started with the drafting. You'll want to purchase some graph paper that I like the inch markings, and maybe 8 to an inch or 4 to an inch works very best. If you will take your thin plastic ruler and mark yourself a 6-inch square, and then divide that 6-inch square into 3 parts. So I'm going to mark over here every 2 inches and give myself a little mark. And you can just follow right along on your graph paper on this one. Then I'm going to take my ruler up to the 2 inches, and I'm going to come in 2 inches, and there we go. We're going to then make a 2-inch square right in the center. Now I'm going to place my ruler diagonally and go from corner to corner, but I'm going to start from my square and go out to the corner, start from the square, go to the corner, and now you are forming a diagonal line, and I will repeat that same diagonal. Now, we now have a spool. Only 2 pieces to it, a center and a spool and background. I do, though, want to add a seam allowance to this. So I lay my plastic ruler on, and I will then draw a line with a different color. I use this red fine liner, and that lets me know that that's my seam allowance. Now I can see that I am going to cut my strips 2.5 inches.
Now you're ready to take the drafted pattern and make a permanent plastic template piece from it. I have a piece of material that's called template plastic, and you can purchase this at an art supply store or if you have a local quilt shop. And I'm going to mark right on top of those red lines, which were your seam allowance lines. And I'm marking all the way around the shape. This is a fine line permanent pen so that it won't smear all over the plastic. And then I'm going to remove the drafted pattern because I don't want to cut through it in this next step. And then now I'm using my my thicker plastic ruler, because with the tool I'm using for cutting on the plastic, that thinner ruler would not have worked well. It's just too thin. Cut all the way around this shape, and it will look just like this. Can you see I've written on it spool 6 inches? Once you start collecting a lot of these, you want to be able to identify them easily. Let's have a little checkpoint here. Place the plastic on top of the original drafted pattern. I want to make a couple of marks here. I've exaggerated them so that you can see them easily, but these dots here are the intersection of the seam points, and they're real important when we start stitching a little bit later. So place those markings on there, and then I take, just a little pin or a needle and puncture right through those dots, all the way through. Now your template is ready to be used for cutting your strips.
And I have my strips already cut here, 2.5 inches, and I will lay my template right on and take and mark this angle. That's very important. That's one of the reasons that we made a template. And then I'll take my wide plastic ruler and then I will mark over here. And now we will be ready to seam it together.
That's right. I've arranged the pieces in the order in which I'm going to sew them together. I've got the center and then the 2 spool pieces. Now remember the dots on the template plastic. Place your pattern on top of the spool pieces, and with your pen, pencil, you can simply transfer those dots right onto, this is the wrong side of my fabric, and I've done the same thing on the opposite side. Now, you might notice that I have placed a centerfold crease line in all of my shapes, and this is going to help me to line these pieces up, because if you can see here, the square extends beyond the spool shape. So I'm going to place a pin right here in the center, and I'm ready to stitch. Now what these dots tell me is that I'm going to start and stop right on the dots. Don't go beyond them or this block is not going to lay flat for you. Now you can do the same thing on the other side. Let's take a look here. This is a finished one. Can you see? Start and stop, start and stop. Now I'm going to join 2 background pieces to this block in exactly the same manner. Again, starting and stopping at the dots. Now finally, can you see that we have these little extensions on the block? These are your final stitching lines. Let's turn it like this. Remember the dots. There they are. Now I'm going to take a pin. You need to hold these points in place here. They need to line up just perfectly at the point. Now take this dot and you place it under the presser foot and drop the needle right down into the dot. And then you stitch all the way to the end. Okay? And you'll repeat this on the 3 remaining sides of this block. Let's take a look at this block as it looks on the back side. Here we go. Can you see this? Start and stop. Also take a look at how the block's been pressed. All of the seams are going out. Give your block a good final press on the right side and you're ready to put it into your quilt.
And now we're ready to do the attic window block. This is a 12-inch block and we will divide that up into 3 parts, and each of your windows sections will be 4 inches. We will do strips 1.5 inches, and of course this wonderful window will be cut 3 inches. We have a wonderful quilt to share with you. This is just a little baby quilt though.
Good example of this one.
And it has a quick little quilt to tie with bows and give to a baby.
That's right. The units have been set together with an additional little sashing strip, and it would be darling with a little flannel backing on it, wouldn't it?
Yes, but most of all I do like to have these wonderful novelty prints just sliced and cut up and put into the window section.
That's great.
This is a spool quilt that I made for Claire Jarrett as a Christmas gift, and now this is why I really like drafting, is because I could make a very large spool and a tiny little spool and a medium-sized spool and then just put them all together and know that they're going to fit.
That's a good use of this technique. Can you see the block in the corner here? It's, I like the way that you've arranged the fabrics, Diana. You've placed the spool fabric side by side rather than opposite in each of the blocks. It's a nice variation.
I know that you're going to really like to try out the drafting, and now you have 2 more blocks to add to your scrap sampler.
That's right.
We've been talking about some popular quilt styles, and Laura and Diana have been showing you week after week a little bit stylish for today, kind of an update on some of those traditional styles. I've got a couple of quilts here that I want you to see. If you were to think what's the most popular style from the 30s, and I know a lot of you have these at home, it's got to be Grandmother's Flower Garden. Here's one that is kind of a humorous twist on this. This is by Helen Kelly, who has done all kinds of quilts, but she hadn't done a Grandmother's Flower Garden until recently, and what inspired her was finding this great fabric. Would you believe all these little faces actually were on one piece of fabric together? It's got a strange mixture. I like to think of it as almost a dinner party where all these people are seated next to each other, Groucho Marx, and there's kind of a Betty Boop figure, Shakespeare, George Washington. There's even Abraham Lincoln up here. And of course, for those of you who don't know Grandmother's Flower Garden, this is the path, and this is the flower in here. And look how she's added these little butterflies. So nothing is completely sacred. I'd like you to feel that you can do just about anything that you want to, including, look at this, this is a baby quilt. And if you're thinking black for a baby quilt, what goes now is anything goes, because this was done by Rebecca Shore for her little niece when she was a baby. She's about a year old and probably has this hanging in her room. So feel free to do anything. Baby blocks can now be black and can be in a nursery. A little later, we're going to talk to Nancy Crow about the double wedding ring, so I thought you'd like to see what an old one looks like with Rod.
Penny, you know the horror that you always imagined has happened. The box being sent and not arriving on time. This is a first for me.
Well, I've got a quilt that we can look at. This is a
Since
basket.
mine didn't arrive.
Yeah. This is from a friend, Carol West, and underneath it, I've got kind of a little part of a double wedding ring. I know you love fabric, so I wanted to look at this. I'm going to show this to Nancy Crow later.
And this has some nice reproduction, well, double pinks, and all of these are reproductions from earlier fabrics.
What do you think these are from? The
I think
50s?
it looks
1950s?
like 1950s to the 1970s. It could be that recent that they're still reproducing these fabrics.
What about these? These are double pinks too?
These are double pinks. They're like what we looked at in that earlier show. These baskets down here have that same, pink on pink and reds. And
I wanted to ask you, these are really small blocks. Is that any clue to the age? Because you think this dates from, my friend said it was fairly early around the Civil War. Does that sound right to you?
I think so from looking at these fabrics. This aqua color I've seen that in a lot of 1860s
Looks almost
quilts.
contemporary,
It does,
doesn't it? Yeah.
and it is very confusing when you start looking at fabrics, and particularly as they reproduced. This print here, that looks a lot like some of the little tiny florals that we looked at in the Grandmother's Flower Garden.
From the 1930s? Like a house dress.
Yes.
Yeah.
But people who really have to start looking at lots of fabrics and study them. You ask about the miniaturization.
The size of the block.
Yeah,
That's
that
not
really
a clue to age particularly.
I think it's wonderful when a quilt maker would take a pattern, and I mean, basket was such a popular quilt pattern, has been used throughout quilt making. And when they miniaturize them like this, it's hard to tell on this quilt. It looks like all of these baskets run the same, but I like when they do something like this, where she's using lots of browns, and then all of a sudden she throws in this little blue and white check.
Now, when I see that, I think
basket.
it's got to be a scrap quilt because they didn't have enough brown. Does that make you think that?
I don't think so. I think it's because women loved fabric, and she obviously had all of this fabric in her scrap bag, and she was pulling it out. She may have gone out and bought particular fabric. I see quite a bit of this print. She may have gone out and bought that specifically. She probably had a lot of double pink fabrics in her sewing.
See it again and again.
That's right, you do.
Now it's time to go and meet Nancy Crow. She's here, and before we see her, I'd like to tell you just a little bit about her, because I think more than any other artist, Nancy has had a great deal to do with supporting other people who are interested in quilts and telling them to be really serious about their work. She was one of the instigators of the first Quilt National back in 1979, and now she and Linda Fowler have what I call Quilt Camp. She doesn't like me to refer to it that way, but it's a quilt design symposium that teaches contemporary artists all kinds of ways of doing different things to fabric, and she's going to show us how she's working with surface design in her own new work. And I'm going to see if she's put this, yes she has, this double wedding ring that I didn't know how to put together.
I laid it out in the traditional pattern. In fact, these are parts of a traditional block that Penny had using perfectly ugly old fabrics. My work is based on this old pattern, which you can see is very small here, and I chose to blow it up into quite a large format.
Here, these same rings.
Right. And then I drafted it so everything is sewn together in straight lines and not using this large piece in the center.
Okay, I want to know why double wedding ring. It's a style that at this time a lot of people love and a lot of contemporary people think is a hoot, you know, this old design.
Well, that's true. I think a circular pattern of any kind has a lot of energy in it, and growing up with it, which as I said before, I didn't like the old fabrics, and so I rather hated this pattern. I saw it as a challenge, and my work is based on old traditional patterns that I usually blow up and abstract.
Mm-hmm. What's new to me about seeing your work is a lot of mixed media. You used to work only in solids. Now I'm seeing a lot more prints, and what is that, string on there?
This is embroidered with pearl cotton, and this particular little quilt has a lot of emotional content because I did this in China when I was an exchange artist there last fall, after having seen 2 truckloads of young men being taken out to be executed. And so these are the ropes that were binding what I call their souls, and these represent their souls. And the quilter, I don't know if it shows here, but the quilter actually then hand quilted on the rifle sights.
Yeah,
the
so
gun
this is a really
sights.
emotional piece for you.
It is a very emotional piece.
You're putting this same kind of thing into your own work.
I like that particular patterning of the bullseye. And yes, I had the quilter do these bullseyes on these, what I call little color block series that are based on the square. And these will be integrated into the double wedding rings on some of the big ones.
All this work is for a new show that you're developing?
Yes.
Okay.
My major fellowship exhibition, which will open at Miami University at the Art Museum, June 8th, 1992. Same idea, the bullseye, and here we have the simple square that is a basic in quilt making traditionally for the last 300 years. And another variation on an old pattern, this is called bow tie, and all I did was blow the pattern up very, very large as a vehicle to carry the colored, the new hand-dyed fabrics, some of which I'm hand dyeing, some were done by Eric Mortai of Texas.
Why are you interested in using more hand dyeing?
I want more of a
You think more
painterly
people are
effect
doing this too?
in my work without actually painting the fabrics. I'm not necessarily interested in that, but I am interested in the hand dyeing. And I feel the palettes we have commercially are far too limited. Hand dyed fabrics will be strong in the 1990s.
Okay, here's one of your great big double wedding
Yes.
rings. What do you think, you're not the only one, I'm seeing this in more and more artists' work that are using hand-dyed fabrics, but are you actually interested in hand dyeing them yourself?
Yes, yes. I've just finished dyeing about 300 yards of fabric myself in buckets out on my farm. It's just wonderful to be able to have a palette of hundreds and hundreds of colors at your disposal.
What I see is that artists are getting much more confident about the technique of doing it, and now they want to even expand the range of.
Yes, I feel that quilt makers who became very well known in the 1980s, who established their reputations, are now on the verge of changing quite profoundly the direction of their work. Many of them, for instance, are interested in printing their own fabrics, painting their own fabrics, and getting far more complex in how they work with the fabric.
So you see that as the trend for the future?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
And I think that quilts are being very influenced by the Afro-American quilts that were made.
Well, I see you having a big influence in it in the design symposium that is really pushing surface design onto a lot of people that knew nothing about it.
Well, that's one of our hopes anyway.
Thanks a lot for coming.
Thank you.
We are going to end the show today with a gallery. I've done a lot of talking over slides in the past, and this time I wanted you to just kind of sit back, relax, and see some work by people all over the country. Please be with us next week. Judy Warren will be here, and our whole topic will be on making